So good afternoon to all of you. I'm very happy to be with you this afternoon to moderate and participate in this debate organized by the Trans-European Policy Studies Association on the implications of the French presidential elections in the EU. So my name is Camille Cerise-Gessan and I'm Deputy Editor-in-Chief of Agence Europe, where I focus on foreign affairs, EU neighbor and enlargement policies, and on defense. As you all know, a presidential elections was held in France on April 10 and 24, returning Emmanuel Macron for 5 years. In Brussels, the second round of voting caused concerns with Emmanuel Macron, the Europeist, facing Marine Le Pen, the Eurosceptic, who proposed a Frexit that did not bear the name. For example, between the two rounds, 3 heads of governments, the German Chancellor and the Spanish and Portuguese prime ministers from socialist parties, made a statement to support, without naming him, Macron. In the column in Le Monde, they explained that the choice facing the French people was crucial for France and for all of us in Europe. It is a choice between a democratic candidate who believes that France is stronger in a powerful and autonomous EU and a far-right candidate who openly sides with those who attack our freedom and democracy. With a divided German coalition, France could be seen as the new leader of the EU. In his re-election speech, Macron called for a stronger Europe. This presidential election was held while France holds the rotating presidency of the EU Council until the end of June. The month of June, traditionally very busy at the EU level, will also be important in France with the legislative elections. It is not clear yet if Mr. Macron will be able to have a majority in the Assemblée nationale, the lower chamber. We will therefore discuss with our guests the French position in the EU and what the French presidency of the EU Council is doing to make the EU stronger. So we are fortunate to welcome today, first, Christine Roger. Hello, Mrs. Roger. You have been since July 2015 Director General for Justice and Home Affairs for the Council of the EU. In previous positions, you were, among others, French Ambassador to the European Union Political and Security Committee, known as PSC, and head of European Commissioner Michel Barnier's private office when he was responsible for regional policy and institutional affairs, and you were advisor to the President of the European Commission, Jacques Chirac. Then, would join us right now, Mrs. Gwendoline Delbos-Corfield. Welcome to you. You are in the European Parliament, Vice President of the Green EFA Group, and you are well known for your involvement on issues like rule of law, digital rights, and equality. You were, at the end of last year, the chair of the EP delegation to Hungary to assess the situation of rule of law. We have also Ophélie Omnes. Mrs. Omnes, bonjour. You are a board member of the European Movement France, founder of Omnes Legal and Positive Lobbying. You are a lawyer and a lobbyist in Paris and in Brussels, and you advise structures like NGOs and private sector, aiming to make society more equal, diverse, and inclusive. You have been an activist in the federalist movement since 2010, being active on both national and European levels. And last but not least, our only man today, Olivier Rosenberg. Welcome to you. Mr. Rosenberg, you are Associate Professor at Sciences Po with the Center for European Studies and Comparative Politics. You are a specialist in legislative studies, European studies, and between both areas, in the role of parliaments in the governance of the EU. You have published a monography of the European Union and the French Parliament and co-edited a number of collective books. Mr. Rosenberg, you are also scientist advisor for the Master of European Affairs of Sciences Po School of Public Affairs and member of the editorial board of the Journal of Legislative Studies and Parliamentary Affairs. So thank you to you all, for you all to be with us today. I am using my position of moderator to ask you the first questions, but please feel free to raise your hand in Zoom or to write a question or comment in the chat. We will try to take as many questions as possible, and I hope we will have a lot of questions. So to begin this debate, I would like to ask all of you, beginning with Mrs. Roger, about the fact that we had an electoral campaign during the rotating presidency of the EU Council. Do you think that the campaign influenced the French presidency of the EU Council, and if yes, how? Mrs. Roger.
Thank you very much. Je vais dire merci beaucoup. Ce sera ma contribution à la diversité linguistique et pour parler de sujets français. Voilà. Thank you very much for this invitation. And first of all, I would like to, of course, remind all of you and those listening that I'm not speaking on behalf of the Council of the European Council. I'm speaking on just in a personal capacity. And of course, the French presidency is not over, so I assume you will bear with me if I continue to be a little bit cautious in assessing results or directions, because there's still 2 months to go. I would like to perhaps reaffirm the fact that a presidency is only 6 months. And it's, of course, natural that EU member states would like to promote this semester, but the semester is prepared by previous presidencies and is followed by other presidencies. So the possibility to shape the agenda is somewhat limited. And we, I think, having been myself in the chair as presidency in 2008, I know that your ambitions are important, but you also have to take into account the situation as you find it when you take the chair. And that, of course, tells us that we have to be a little bit modest about it. Nevertheless, I personally consider that the way presidencies are branded, are prepared, you can still have a focus. And this focus has been prepared by the President of the Republic in 3 areas, which is environment, digital, and also he was also very strong about the protection of borders. Those were themes that came across in his speeches before the presidency and at the very beginning of the presidency in January. So the focus means that in terms of preparing for presidency, you will allocate resources accordingly. And you would also plan in council working parties that I oversee the right number of meetings. So it has an impact in terms of planning, resources, and also political and communication support. So this is the way a presidency colors its semester, hoping to get as many results as possible. This has been the case, as I said, but events happen as they have. And of course, the Ukrainian situation is definitely giving a very special twist to this presidency, which I think has reacted the way everybody wanted to react, which is decisively, quickly, with action, not only words. So I suppose any presidency would have reacted this way. But the interesting thing is that the themes which are always underlying any French positioning, which is autonomy, resilience, these themes are becoming even more mainstream than they used to be because of the crisis. So in a sense, history has substantiated the legitimacy of French claims that we should strive to be more independent, more resilient, in a way which, of course, nobody would have expected. And that also gives more weight to the priorities, the angle that the French presidency has taken.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Delvaux-Scorfield, have you seen some particular things in the European Parliament, for example? Have you seen that the campaign had some influence in the French presidency or in the debate in the European Parliament?
Yes, hello everyone. To be very honest, to answer to this question, I would say that for me as a member of Parliament, French presidency at the same time as French election was not good news. And I could foresee that it could be a problem on some of the topics I work on, because of course on rule of law, on the question of rights and liberties, French Perm Rep and French state is an ally. They are serious. They make a constant work on this, and we know that we can count on them. But then when comes the communication aspects of that is inevitable in a presidential campaign, I was a bit worried that this would be a way of using these topics as a way to give the image of a president of France who is very rule of law friendly. And in rule of law topics, what we need is action, and it's not communication. And we have been really endangered by a lot of communication these last years and not a lot of action. So that would have been a problem. And I also felt that it could be a problem in precipitation. Doing things in an accelerated way. As it was said, one of the big goals of this presidency was digital. There was a determination of the French presidency to get the DSA and the DMA ended during their presidency. I was very, very concerned about that. I think in the end it was fine, but you know, these digital acts and had in themselves the danger of being a moment where there would be censorship on some digital freedoms and all of this. We were in big debates here in the parliament, and I was very concerned if these debates were erased by the will of one presidency to finish absolutely during its presidency. So for me, it wasn't a very good news. But that being said, as it was just said by my predecessor, Ukraine, in fact, anyway, changed things. I mean, if Ukraine was very useful for President Macron on the French scene to win his election and to use this, I mean, in a good way, I'm not this war to show the image of a chief of government very responsible and very strong. On the European level, I think that it at least it derailed a bit of the agenda of the French presidency. I think that was good. I think that they had to deal with the situation and maybe do less work on communication. On one topic, I think it was a good thing because the French are on the side of the Conference of the Future of Europe. They have been since the very beginning. They even considered that they were a bit at the beginning of the idea. And also, so that helped a lot because this Conference on the Future of Europe at various moments could have been threatened by a certain number of people in Parliament, in Commission, in Council, and the French standed behind it. And because it was their presidency, they standed even more behind it. So I think this was very good. All of that being said, in the end, for us, what was important for me on the topic, for example, of Article 7 was that France did not dismiss and did follow up with a hearing on Hungary. They have, so I am happy about this. It has to be said that anyway, the permanent work of a member state and its permanent representation in Brussels, you know, really goes beyond the 6 months of presidency, and I know that we can count on them on this. Now, my big worry with this second mandate in a very particular moment in France is is France going to be such an ally on rule of law aspect, or is the commercial aspects of the work that can be done in the business that can be done in the Western Balkans and in Hungary could not sometimes a bit put France less a friend of rule of law, the same sort of attitude that we had from Germany for a long time. The presidency and the new re-election has also changed a bit the balance here between Germany and France, where in Germany we have for the moment quite a weak chief of government, and in France we have this very strong figure of Macron. So I hope that this will not change also the work we do on rule of law.
Thank you very much. For the two, for Ophélie and Olivier, you are based both in Paris. I know, Ophélie, you are traveling most to Brussels, but Have you seen during the French campaign for the presidential elections? Have you seen a lot of EU? Did they talk a lot about of EU? Sorry, and did they talk about the rotating French presidency of the European Council, or it was not at all an issue?
Well, if you put aside the controversy we had at the beginning of January, as if to whether we should or shouldn't have the European flag under the Arc de Triomphe, other than that, I think that we can say that fairly Europe wasn't present in the very first part of the campaign and then became more present as it looked like we would go back to having Macron against Le Pen another time. And especially since she had changed her a program, the way she was portraying her position when it comes to the EU, as you mentioned it. Well, in the end, there were quite some changes about the position of European topics in the campaign, I would say. For instance, in the entre deux tours debate that we had, Europe was the third of the fourth topic that was discussed. It had never happened before. So in this regard, there had been some changes, and yet, and maybe I'm a bit biased there because of course, like when one is really involved into EU topics, then you would like to have more. But I would still say that Europe and the position on Europe was not discussed enough between the candidates before the results of the first round. So as I said, between first and second round, yes, we put the topic back on the table, but when we had all those 12 candidates beforehand, I have to say I was disappointed in not seeing and not highlighting the differences between all of them, because in the end, I had this impression that from the outside perspective, there was this feeling of, as French people, you can only get Macron elected if you want to keep France as a fair player in Europe. Whereas I don't think that was true. I think that there were other candidates who had also an interesting agenda on Europe, but we actually never really got a chance to hear about it, unless you are like a European nerd and then you would get into the programs and so on. But other than that, whether that's in the media, the radio, the newspapers, but also in the discussions and answers from one candidate to another. I can't really talk about a debate because there were no debates between the candidates, which was also a shame because Europe actually was a topic on which they were very different from one another. And it would have been important to the French citizens, to the ones that are sensitive to European topics, but I think not only, because in a context such as the war that was happening in Ukraine, and it's been mentioned multiple times, but I think that the French people, all of a sudden, even though some of them were not that close to those European topics, I remember hearing discussions about the European army or defense. Should we have it? Shouldn't we have it? Like these topics were very, very high on the agenda and in the minds of the French people end of February, beginning of March. And yet, when you looked at the public debate and at the debate, so to say, in the public sphere between candidates, it was a shame not to have them answer on what was their perspective on Europe. What would they do if they had to become president of the Republic the next day? And I think that this aspect was really lacking because, yes, from one perspective, one could say that we talked a bit more about Europe than before. But on the other hand, yeah, thankfully we talked more about Europe because Europe was in everybody's mind a lot more than it was ever before. And if you look at it from this perspective, I don't think that we discussed it enough for the stake. And to answer your second question about, did we know or did we discuss the French presidency of the Council of the European Union? I would say no. I think while I discussed a bit with the people who are outside like the bubble, so to say, here in Paris, and most people didn't even know that was happening. And when they did, because maybe you read the newspaper and you knew that there was the French presidency, most people don't really know what it is. Like, what does it mean? What does it imply? Who is playing what kind of role? And all this kind of discussion comes back to the topic of pedagogy on Europe in France that is still very much lacking. And that was also one of the key elements of that very long wish list that the presidency issued at the beginning of January. And that aspect wasn't successful enough because we have not talked about what was going on. And there has been close to no further activities on that specific point as to how do we target citizens and how do we explain to them what is currently happening, taking the advantage of having this 6 months time that we have every 13 years, I think it is. So I think that in this regards, like there could have been an improvement. And I think that one last comment could be that the confusion that was between the elections and the presidency actually didn't help, especially since this portrayal of Emmanuel Macron being the candidate of Europe didn't really help people understand that it is not that Europe is important because it is in Emmanuel Macron's program, but it is important like a side of it. And I think that the confusion that was made, I think on purpose from the French institutions, was actually like not helping to promote the European idea in France by making it seem like it was something that was very partisan.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Rosenberg, for example, Mr. Macron said the second round will be a referenda for or against the EU. Do you think it was a good thing to say and a good way to see the elections?
I think it was the case the previous election, 2015, very very clearly, because Marine Le Pen put at that time a lot of emphasis on European issues, especially on the withdrawal from the EMU. So during the TV debate 5 years ago, it was a key question of the debate when Macron asked within eyes to Marine Le Pen, do you want to withdraw from the EMU? And she was very confused in her answer, etc. We didn't have that this time, despite, of course, the willingness of Macron to play this again because it was in his favor. Yet, this being said, we didn't came back to the previous situation when Europe was totally absent from the domestic debate. Now, I was very, I noticed during the debate, for instance, this TV debate in between the two rounds, followed by billions of French citizens, that, of course, they did not mention EU issues in itself for 15 minutes, etc. But regarding most of the issues they addressed, at one time or another, the European dimension, the shadow of the European Union was present. Be it, of course, geopolitics with the context of the war in Ukraine, but also be it energy, the question of the purchasing power of the citizens, the capacity to buy things, etc. And also regarding environment and the nuclear file. So on many issues, at one time or another, the EU compatibility, the compatibility of the platforms of the candidates with the EU agendas, these issues were raised. And as an observer, to me, it's rather a good thing, this kind of mainstreamization of European issues within the French domestic debate that for so long has been very parochial.
Thanks. Mrs. Roger, as working in the EU Council, have you seen some member states a concern about the possibility to have Mrs. Le Pen, President of France?
You, of course, realize that nobody speaks about it in council meetings. Like it's somewhere, but so if you're talking about the coffee machine, yes, there was some worry around the coffee machine because the program that we had heard of was, contained elements which, in my view, would have rocked the boat in quite a substantial way. I'm interested also in looking at Jim Claus's comment in the chat and following up on what Ophélie has just said. I think scrutinizing programs on what exactly they have in mind for Europe is probably something that we didn't do enough. But now still we have legislative coming up. So maybe it's also a good opportunity to, now that the European cause has been confirmed at the highest level, just to look a bit more closely as to what various parties are offering and what it actually means, because dreams of not applying EU law or pour nous c'est pas pareil. No, for you it's the same thing. If somebody starts saying that EU law is not something that should be applied by all member states, then the whole thing falls apart. So let's, we still have a bit more time to check and look at things the way I think we should.
Sorry, it was one of my questions, because we will have the legislative election. So we will have French ministers who will be campaigning in France and at the same time chairing meetings in Brussels. And we have seen these last days the alliance between France Insoumise and EELV, and they're talking a lot about the EU and the fact that they will not respect some laws if they don't like these European laws. So if they obtain a lot of seats in the Assemblée Nationale, I know it's a if question, but we don't know what will happen. What could be the impact on the position of France in the EU? And do we have a risk to not have the approbation of the Assemblée Nationale on EU laws? What do you think about that, Mr. Rosenberg?
I think that the only question is the question is raised only in the case where there is a greater majority for the left than for Macron. And in that case, there would be a government headed by Mr. Mélenchon. I tend to be less concerned than Jim Claus for 3 reasons. First, the Prime Minister Mélenchon would be a Prime Minister of divided government, of cohabitation, and therefore, regarding European issues, we'll have to bargain and deal with Macron. It will not be for sure a peaceful game, but still, he will not be in a position to do whatever he wants. Second, there are some ongoing compromises which are done on the platform of on the agenda of the radical left movement. In the follow-up of the bargains with the Green and the Socialist, so there is already some compromises that are made. We don't know yet clearly what it is about, but my feeling is that they are ready not to put red lines on this or that EU issues. And the third reason is that, the EU has changed since the COVID crisis, as you know, with this recovery and resilience agenda, with an opening of the discussions on the future of the Pact for Growth and Stability, with the new German government as well, I'm not suggesting that the EU has become Mélenchonist, far from that, but still there is less distance between the EU talks, at least the future talks for the next semester and last year especially, and the platform of the left. So I think we could be not so much concerned from a pro-EU perspective, to say it quickly.
Thanks. Mrs. Delbos-Corfield, you are part of the Green in the European Parliament. Are you concerned about this alliance between France Insoumise and ELV? We know the Greens in the European Parliament are really pro-Europe. It's maybe not the same with the France Insoumise on some subjects. So are you concerned about that? And have you seen some of your colleagues from other political parties or from other countries coming to talk to you? We are concerned.
I will answer this question, of course. I will start by also answering the Jean-Claude's question, because I think it's very linked. I think that indeed what Mélenchon, the evolution of Mélenchon, which is a positive evolution if you think about where they're coming from, it has to be scrutinized as the work of, as of course the proposals of Marine Le Pen, where again, I mean, she used to talk really about a Frexit and she doesn't anymore. But I want to say first and foremost that I think this is a French problem overall. I think it is still not that clear in France, even in these parties that say that they are pro-Europe and federalist, they are so much pro-Europe. What I mean is that I read this in Politico not long ago, and it's something that I often say, so I was very happy to see it. Politico said France likes Europe when Europe is France, and I think this is so true. I live this every day with all of my colleagues from whatever group they come. It is very rare to have a French MEP who doesn't think that the parliament is interesting if it doesn't talk about something else than France. I mean, there is very little interest to most of what happens in Europe, apart from a bit the southern countries, and generally they always think that, you know, if it's great if it's about French ideas, but it's not great if it's not about French ideas. And this is also the case in Renew, and I think this is also an attitude of Macron. Macron likes Europe when Europe is useful for him on the French scene, and I could say this also for some of our Greens. I mean, on this I have no, specific targets. So I think this is a more general problem, and I also think that, for example, what Macron said at the very beginning of this presidency, there was an allusion from Mrs. Christine Roger about Schengen was very concerning. I mean, Macron started saying, we should reform Schengen because basically we should have more freedom on when we close borders or not. I think France really likes to make Europe on the model of what France thinks should be done. So this is a more general problem. That's also why I'm not that specifically worried on this platform between the left in France. Three reasons for that. First one is that I think that it's a lot of communication. It's, we are strong, we will disobey Europe when we need, and all this, Portugal did it and they didn't make a huge communication about it. And, the problem is we are all traumatized by that day where Hollande said, I will disobey, and he didn't even try, which was a problem. But there's always a way to negotiate on the European level. That's one of the problems of Europe sometimes. So, I mean, it's a bit absurd sometimes to say, I will be the strong man that will for the first time disobey. I think this is a lot of communication and a lot of arrogance, typically French. The second thing is that they have, once again, already changed a lot what they say. They say for certain topics, we will. It's once again, I mean, the story, the narrative about Europe 5 years ago was very different. And the third thing is that it's a difficult moment in France for the left in general, and they are trying to find a way to have a common platform, but I don't think that most of the Greens, for example, would apply certain things. And it's not a problem of trust. I mean, they're not lying to the people, and the socialists weren't either, and all of this. It will then be a discussion about what is possible and what is not, if it was to happen. That being said, I do think that even in words, it is problematic. I'm going to be very honest. I'm one of the rare French federalists. It is very rare. I mean, I have so many German colleagues, and we are very few. Just for you to give an example, I am speaking 5 times in this session in Strasbourg. That's why I was 5 minutes left. I didn't ask for 2 of the speaking moments. I didn't want to have them because I had already too much on my plate with Article 7 and Turkey and all this. And I was asked by my group because they were so worried that there would be no French Greens talking on a transnational list and on the future of the conference on the future of Europe. And there were sort of 10 Germans asking to speak, German Greens. So it is a problem. It is a problem that in France, we like to say that, you know, we take some part of Europe and not the same, because that's exactly what I have a problem I have with Hungary, with Poland. That's exactly what they're saying. They're saying, we like some parts of Europe, but we don't want to have it all. So I don't think it is possible. I think that when you engage in a collective project, you have to fight for what you don't agree with it, but you cannot start from the beginning saying, I will choose. So I do think it is a problem, but I think it's more generally a problem also in the awareness about what is Europe. I agree with what was said before. It was very sad that it was not in the discussions in the first round of the election. I mean, all of this shows that we have a problem in France. In France, Europe is really used as a token against or for when it's needed in the French debate, but not enough for what Europe really is. So I do still disagree with what is said in this platform. And you had a last question, sorry. Yes, there is a huge concern in the German Greens. So the German Greens are very, very worried. They are really fantasying a lot of things, and we have to tell them, come on, don't be worried. But there is a big worry. There's even more a big worry for them that they had to fight themselves in their own country a few months ago, when some people started saying, and the court, the constitutional court of the famous Karlsruhe judgment, that said that indeed certain things were not to be applied in Germany, and it wasn't constitutional, and the German Greens were on the side of those saying, we can't say that, and we have to change things if this is the case. So they are very worried about this Europe à la carte that they feel behind these words. They often forget that in France, politics is a lot about words that don't have actions behind. It's less the case in Germany. In Germany, they have a program and they apply the program. They sometimes forget that in France, you say a lot of things and then in the end, you don't do a lot of what you've said.
Thank you very much. I think Mrs. Le Pen was not really fair when she said to Macron during the debate, like, okay, you are not defending the French interest in Brussels, because I think he is really defending the French interest. And as you said, I mean, it's French interest first, and if it's the same than the EU interest, it's fine. And if it's not, that's not an issue. We will push for the French one. Just to talk again about the French presidency of the EU Council. Okay, we are still in the beginning of May, but do you think there is some subject which are not be developed until now and should be developed during the end of the presidency? Maybe Ophélie first.
I have to admit that on this very specific topic, I am still not an expert on what the presidency has planned to still apply by the end of the mandate, but maybe there are a few thoughts that might be interesting in this regard. Before that, I will quickly come back to what was said about this perception of Jean-Luc Mélenchon reaching, becoming a prime minister, and the left, having this platform and coming together under this banner, I would say. I think from the outside perspective, it's very linked to the impression or kind of comments or worries that people had from the outside of France, looking at Marine Le Pen getting 40%. I think there is really something that doesn't really come across outside the borders, that Emmanuel Macron is not as great like a president or a man in affairs as he seems to be from the outside. And one may or may not agree with the position he has or he doesn't have. But I think that somehow, from what I've understood from my colleagues outside France and the European countries, and in kind of comments and concerns that I've got during the second, like before the second run, and even afterwards, I think there is this idealization of Macron precisely because you see European flags during his meetings, because he's marched to the European anthem when he was elected 5 years ago. So I think there is this idealization from the outside perspective to say, oh, at least you have a European president. I've heard that so many times. And I think that it's true that we have never heard so much about Europe since he has arrived into office, and one has to realize that. But I think there is one aspect that Europeans have to understand as well, is that Europe is, fortunately or unfortunately, only one of the topics you have to deal with when you're president. And if Europe in France, precisely because he has made it something partisan, as I was saying before, has become, like, the perception of Europe inside of France seems to have become something for the people who can afford it. Because you talk about the roaming, you talk about like the possibility to travel, you talk about a lot of things that a lot of French people can't afford. And the problem is that once you have this reality that most of the examples you could take on Europe are things that that are actually beneficial to the people who earn like the most and who can benefit from these advantages. And on top of that, you add up that Macron being perceived as liberal and or conservative, depending on who you ask. Well, then in the end, there is not a lot to be left to the people who struggle to feed their families. And in France, there are quite a large amount of people who are still in the situation. And I think that looking at the numbers for Marine Le Pen in the second round, or looking at the left trying to join forces behind Jean-Luc Mélenchon, is actually not so much worrying, but says something about the French society that is actually splitting into Europe being perceived as something for the people who can afford it, as opposed to the people who can't afford it. And I think that's the next challenges are, or the next challenge when it comes to Europe is actually to sort of water down this very radical left discourse as to listen to the pro-European left, because there is such a thing that as a pro-European left, whether it's in the Greens, in the Socialists, or even in some people inside Jean-Luc Mélenchon on party. But I think that from the outside, one needs to understand that it's not so black and white. It's actually a lot more complex than that. And it is also the French citizens trying to express their voices and actually having a hard time trying to understand between moderate and liberal, because moderate and liberal are not a synonym to one another. Now, to come back on your original question, Camille, well, I think that objectively, if we look at how it's been done, and I'm happy to hear comments about other panelists on this. Politically speaking, the French presidency ended at the end of March. Like, politically speaking, it was known that at the end of March, we would stop all the purely political work that can be done in a presidency, precisely because, well, we had to change the president, and changing the president and the prime minister at the same time, meaning it was not only changing the president, because, for instance, Portugal also had this kind of issue, I would say, to change their president at the beginning of January 2021, when they took the presidency. The very big difference between Portugal and France is that the president doesn't hold any responsibility when it comes to Europe. you didn't have to change the whole government or anything. So it was more over like representative function. So that would have been okay if we had to change it in this context. In our context, we get to change the president and the prime minister and the entire government, meaning that as we speak, we still do not have a government. We're still waiting to have a temporary government. And in a month's time, we will change again because they will have to reflect the results of the election, meaning that if everything goes well, by the end of June, so by the end of the presidency, we get to have another government. So thankfully, there is the work that is done by the permanent representation when it comes to helping the file move on. We also have this theoretically idea that the ministers that have been involved, and more importantly, the services of the French administrations that have been involved in the files, they will keep on being involved. But I think that in terms of very big files, if they were not done or started before the presidential election, I don't think that we can hope that anything or any new topics could come across. And I think that the only topic that could and that should end up having meaningful results is the outcome of the conference on the future of Europe, because it was also because of the French presidency and because of the French elections and because of Emmanuel Macron's own idea of his importance in Europe. I would say it like that, because I stand by very much by what Gwendoline said before, that there is this impression of Europe being France in a bigger scale, like the way Europe has been discussed. And it should have been 2 years. And yes, there were COVID, but the reason why we moved from 2 years to barely a year is not because of COVID, because it could have been postponed. It's because there was the French presidency, and COVID or not COVID, the French institutions wanted to end the conference under their own presidency. And I think it was a bad choice to make, because I think it was too important and it is too important for the European citizens to be held hostage by the French calendar. But now that the calendar has been decided as it is, one last meaningful decision or impactful measures that can be taken by this presidency are the ones regarding the conference on the future of Europe and making this moment in European history meaningful.
Thank you very much. So, Christine Roger, are you on holidays until the end of June? Or will the Council continue to work, even if the French presidency seems, according to Ophélie, not being working anymore since March, or less working since March?
The sun never sets on the Council. So we always work all the time, which is sometimes difficult for presidencies, because we tend to try to explain to them that we're always in presidency, you see. So they run overdrive for 6 months and then they can rest. Well, we don't get to rest. And I would not necessarily agree with the notion that presidency is politically over. I think, as Ophélie was saying, you don't start a new big file with any view of completing the file at the beginning of May. That's just never happens. And what perm reps can do, by the way, there are about 300 people out there. So in Brussels, they've sort of doubled the numbers, or at least increased by 1/3. So they will continue, and if there's a big file, they will take it forward to bring it to future presidencies. But you don't start a new project in May. But there's still things that need urgent attention, and one of them is obviously the consequences for the budget of the Ukrainian crisis. And that, I think, although it's not planned, as it was not planned by the French, is something they would have to take care of. Obviously, they will need to tackle this with a lot of energy and drive to get this through, and also at the European Council level already, perhaps at the end of May, I don't know, or at the latest in June. And there's also one other very difficult thing which will come mostly to the European Council, which is the issue of enlargement, again on the table. So in a sense, it's not because the French wanted it, but they do have to take care of this, and I'm sure we'll have a lot of discussions around this in the coming 2 months. I think one, being in the Council Secretariat, I sometimes have the feeling that we don't build bridges enough with other presidencies. We do have a trio program and we work on the trio program, but it's a little bit theoretical, and it's a drafting exercise, which is interesting because it brings 3 administrations together and it helps prepare them. But I think we should go more into the direction of thinking several semesters, because there are files that really span over a long period of time. And one of them that I'm currently working on and have been working on for years is the reform of the asylum system in the European Union. And here we have, I think, a rather clever approach from the European Parliament. For the moment, they have turned to presidencies like France and Czech presidencies and the Swedes and Spain and Belgium, and says, look, you're the 5 presidencies that will be active during the second part of the European Parliament mandate. So how do we tackle this in a way which is consistent over several presidencies? And I think this is really welcome as an approach and should encourage, first of all, the French, but then next presidencies to think in terms of several months or years to complete a file in a way which hopefully will deliver results. I would also support what Jim has said in the chat. I think French bashing is nice, and French citizens usually indulge a bit too much, perhaps, in this direction. But I think each and every member state is trying to pursue national interest, which is just fine. There's no such thing as pure romantic view of Europe, where we all have interests. And the issue is to acknowledge the interests and then work together so that by and large, the outcome is generally positive for everyone. And we're not trying to win case points or to lose, that winners and losers. That's not how we view. So coming here with an agenda, each and every presidency is going to do it. The issue is how to overcome the agenda, or how to give and take, so that in the end it's Europe that wins. So I don't have a difficulty with this. I think it's only natural.
Thank you very much. Just to talk about enlargement, and as I told you, I'm also a journalist and dealing with enlargement. I think it will be a big and a complicated issue for France, because we know France is not the most open country for the enlargement policy, and they will have to deal with that at the end of June. So it will be just between or just after the legislative election. So I think it will be complicated for France to deal with that, because we have the issue of Ukraine, of Moldova, and Georgia. But we have also the question of the conflict between North Macedonia and Bulgaria. And for years, the presidency is trying to have a solution on that. And maybe the 2 countries, North Macedonia and Bulgaria right now, are more keen to have an agreement, but we need the French presidency of the EU Council to push for the agreement and to say, now you have to find a solution. We have to unblock the subject. Bulgaria has to unblock, because we have to move on, because it will be complicated to have a great balance between the fact that we want to move with Ukraine, also to give political signs to Ukraine. Maybe Moldova and Georgia are other issues, but at the same time, we can't let the Western Balkans waiting, like saying, like, okay, you don't have a war in your country, you will have to wait again for more. North Macedonia is waiting for years to open officially the negotiations, and Albania is saying now, like, okay, we don't want to wait anymore. We don't want to stay coupled, even if officially they are not coupled, but we don't want to stay coupled with North Macedonia. We want to be split and to open, and maybe Skopje will do it later. So I think it will be a big and a really complicated issue for France. Olivier Rosenberg, Ophélie talk also about the Conference on Future of Europe. Do you think it was a good project, and do you think we will have real results on this Conference of Europe, or it's just like a big show and nothing will happen then?
Well, I think we already have some results, since we have proposed and drafted the recommendations this week, and to me it's already a success, because it worked. It worked in the sense that they delivered something, that there were genuine debates and interesting debates between not only randomly selected citizens, but also representatives from the institutions, and it was not obvious that it would work. I think we should not expect too much from the exercise, and what has been done so far is interesting, and that there will be follow-up. We don't know which, but there will be a follow-up. And I suspect that some proposals will not be implemented like that next month or next semester, but it set the agenda for the future. So I think that my preliminary assessment is very positive. As far as we don't expect the EU to solve its legitimacy problem through such an exercise that does not fuse a lot. But I've been a bit surprised that so far the French presidency lowered the exercise. I did not mention it. Has not mentioned it a lot. I mean, they could have show up a bit more, because it was at the beginning not only French initiative, but really Macron's own personal agenda. So we know that behind the scenes they pushed for it, they supported it, etc. But it has not been very present in the public debate. And well, that's for the future of Europe. Just to make a point on what you were discussing with on the future enlargement, etc. I'm seeing that the debate on a new architecture for the large Europe is gaining ground in France as well as in Italy over the last week. So, including within the Macron circles, there's more and more the idea that something has to be found in between being a member of the EU or not being a member of the EU, that there should be a large circle of not only associate members, but something more, which would be kind of light EU. Of course, it should not be called like that. And we'll see, but to me, it's on the agenda of the second presidency of Macron, not presidency of the EU, but presidency on the French of the French Republic. And maybe they will not be very dynamic on the enlargement issue, as always with French authorities. Also, because now there is this idea that the conference should be called over the next month on the Organization of Eastern Europe, yeah.
And just to follow up, are you concerned that the enlargement could be an issue for the legislative elections? Because, for example, you can have some political parties like Rassemblement National saying, okay, if you elect people from La République En Marche, for example, they will push for the enlargement. And you know, when you are talking about enlargement, people think that if you say to Ukraine, okay, you will be a member, they think it will be for tomorrow. I mean, they forget there is like maybe 5 years or 10 years of a long and complicated process. So do you think it could have an impact on the legislative elections?
No, I don't. I think that purchasing powers issues, the prices of energy, so some issues which are clearly linked with, that have an EU dimension and linked with EU development, can have an impact, but not the issue of enlargement. And well, 5 years ago, the question of the posted worker directives, of the social dumping associated with it, was very present, but it's less so since it has been reformed. And Macron always mentioned it as a positive element in what he has done. So I suspect that his opponents will avoid the topic for that reason.
Thank you. And Mrs. Delbos-Caulfield, the European Parliament is really involved in the Conference of Future of Europe. What do you expect from the end of this conference next Monday? And what do you expect from the French presidency to push and to follow up on this conference?
Well, first, I think it needs to be said to acknowledge that it's a positive thing. As Mr. Rosenberg said, we were not that sure. We pushed a lot in Parliament for citizens' participation. It wasn't easy. We managed to get some. We used the example of the French Convention on Climate, which was a very good example because it's a pity what happened at the end with the proposals, but the work itself of the convention was done in a very interesting way, and this is one of the things that I would give a credit to this government, is that they really gave the means for this convention to work during the process of discussion. And we really took this example for the Conference of the Future of Europe, and it wasn't done as strongly, of course, but there was a real implication of the citizens, and that, for one thing, was good. Also, it existed. I had a real concern at the beginning that it would only be a show indeed, and it also, you had implication from also members of national parliaments, you had implication from the governments, you had implication from members of parliament here. So I think already to acknowledge the fact that it did function is something. What we expect now is a push on a certain number of progressive ideas and on a more integrated and federalist Europe. I don't think we can dream of the end of unanimity, but at least this has become more and more a topic of discussion, and there will be a push coming from this Conference of Future of Europe. And as all along the process, there was always the Parliament pushing after some things coming out. So it will be the same now. We need to go on pushing, saying, the idea of changing the treaties came out of the discussion. They asked, the citizen clearly asked for a social Europe. There were progressive ideas on migration and all this. So we will have to go on pushing this. We had the debate in Parliament today, and that was basically what most of the extreme right people said it was a complete unsuccessful thing and it was useless. But basically all the others were saying, now we need to use what we have been given. So I'm not expecting that much. I know that everything needs to then be fighted for. So it will be a very good base to fight for it. And what I think the French presidency will do, and I hope they will do, is also push next to us, because once again, it has been said and said again, it was an idea coming partly from Macron. I mean, it was already around here, Verhofstadt and others had discussed about it, but it was something that really Macron in 2012, in 2017, in this first election, really pushed for, and it was one of his term mandate goals. And I think he cannot see that just go away now. And he will need it indeed. So I expect some support from the French presidency, and I hope they will do. I agree with Mr. Rosenberg that they were not that present in it, because I think that they, in fact, saw the shortcomings of having a campaign at the same time of the Conference of the Future of Europe as the same time as the presidency, and then Ukraine came out of all of this. So it was, in fact, difficult to deal with it. But now maybe they can come back a bit more in force into it. We also didn't have that much French members of parliament involved, for example. I mean, the big names were Verhofstadt, Gossi, there was Pascal Durand, of course, but I would have thought there would be more of the new French Renew people involved. So maybe they will come in a bit more now. And just to say on the Balkans, Western Balkans, I also think that this is something that we will have to scrutinize. There is this big discussion that the French presidency wants to organize before they leave in June, because indeed The attitude of France is not always clear for us. I mean, on one hand, you will have the German attitude that will be always, you know, to open and say yes, and sometimes not be, you know, cautious enough on a number of things. But the French, they have been going from saying nasty things to now saying, you know, indeed everyone should come in. So we will have to have a look at what happens there, because indeed we need to go on the work with those that were already enlisted as wanting to come in. But at the same time, we need to be very serious because we have a lot of rule of law issues that are not dealt with. We already have problems with Hungary and Poland inside the European Union. So we, you know, before we let others come in, we really need to work on this seriously.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Roger, is the Council talking about the Conference on Future of Europe? What will happen in the Council about this conference?
The General Affairs Council has regular discussions about this. We do expect some more finalized outcomes, so it's still a bit undecided. And depending on the outcome, we'll see how we react to it. I'm not following this very closely. I've just had a look at the kind of ideas that are being floated. And to me, I think it's quite encouraging because it demonstrates a level of commitment to what we could be doing together, which is very, very interesting. I've witnessed a number of treaty changes also when I was in the Commission, and actually 2 treaty changes that I was directly involved with, including the first convention. And to me, it's okay. We'll see if that's needed. Why not? But I tend to be more interested in action. And if there is something that comes out of this conference, for instance, we should go more boldly on social matters, for instance, or we expect Europe to do this and that on the environment. To me, it's a call for action. So let's go for it as soon as possible, because in a sense it represents expectations. I'm not sure citizens expect treaty changes for the sake of having treaty changes. What they want is results. So I would tend to be a bit practical here, what we can already achieve today, or let's do it and use the conference as an impetus to move forward on a number of important issues.
Thank you very much. Now I will open the floor for some questions. Do we have some people who would like to ask some questions to our panels? Don't be shy. Okay,
Maybe Camille, maybe what I can add while we are waiting for questions is that so next week there will be the 9th of May, which will both be Europe Day in the EU and also a celebration of World War II in Russia. Well, don't want to play of being too much concerned, but it will be an important time and timing for the presidency, as we know with the Ukraine war, but anything can happen, and that we have to be ready to very unexpected events on behalf from Putin. So well, it's an issue for the French presidency, knowing that as we said, Macron is in a very special position, since for 1 month and a half is in a way continuing his electoral campaign without being totally sure to have a majority. It's likely that he will have one, but it's not sure. So of course any of his reactions will be governed by his image within the electorate.
But just to complete what you are saying, the fact that war in Ukraine change the presidency is also complicated for the French presidency, because at the same time, Macron is dealing with Zelensky, dealing with Putin, is talking to each president. He talked today with Putin, he talked like 3 days ago with Zelensky, so he is really involved in the trying to find a solution, or at least trying to move to some negotiations. But at the same time, since the Lisbon Treaty, the presidency doesn't, the rotating presidency doesn't have so much power in foreign affairs. It's Borrell. So I think for the French, it's quite complicated to find a way they can move on things linked to the presidency, like on energy issues. We had a meeting yesterday in Brussels with the minister to talk about that and so on. But I think it's complicated for a presidency when we have an international crisis to deal with, like being the presidency, because we have Charles Michel. So if we want the EU, we will ask Charles Michel, or we can ask Ursula von der Leyen. And just on what Mrs. Roger was saying, I think that we don't need to maybe open the treaty again, because we can see that during the crisis, the EU is building itself. We have seen that with the vaccines on COVID-19. We could see that with all the sanctions and what the EU is doing about Ukraine. So maybe it's also a way to move, and maybe we don't need the rotating presidency anymore. What do you think about that? Olivier, maybe first.
So there are two issues. On the first one, I think that Macron is able to find a role, even if on the paper the role is not here. Also, we know that he has good relations with the top decision makers at the EU level, which facilitate things, be it Charles Michel or Borrell or von der Leyen. So, well, it's not an issue, and I think it enables the EU to collectively play a subtle geopolitical game with some actors involved in a dialogue with Putin, as Macron, phoning him from time to time, and others promoting a firmer attitude. And I think that this subtle reaction is rather clever, because it enables to have a diversity of strategy, meanwhile still with some unity. On the second issue, on the utility of the rotating presidency after Lisbon, well, what we see is a kind of split between the Brussels machinery of negotiating directives and regulations and high politics with the summits. And from both perspectives, I think it still makes sense to have this change once every 6 months, because it's also in the dealing of the bargains. I'm thinking of for instance, of the directives on the weighted minimal wage, which is under discussion. The fact of having a new presidency once every 6 months put some fresh blood in the discussions with a new partner, with a new agenda, with a perspective within the agenda. So on a very long legislative process, now it takes on the average 2 years to bargain the directives on the regulation. It is good to have steps within these 2 years, as the rotating presidencies are.
Sorry, thank you very much. Mrs. Roger, so you talk a bit about the rotating presidency, but we have a question for you in the chat. I will read it because I think you can see it, but not everyone could see it. So Christine Roger noted that the French permanent representation has expanded significantly in the recent past. It is not clear to me what was meant by recent past, but if there has been significant expansions over the last decade, how would you explain these expansions? Have you seen similar expansions in other permanent representations?
Yes, thank you for the question. I was not sufficiently clear. When you are preparing for presidency, normally the perm reps increase their personnel. So you have people coming in, preparing to chair working parties, and then after the presidency, you shrink again a bit. So it's a natural process that each and every member state does, and it's normal because you do have to man several working parties, and that's normal. And I think in the last 2 years they have grown from, I think, 200 to 280, something like this. So it's increased by 1/3, but they will, I'm sure, shrink again after the presidency. But in the past, quite a long time ago, when I first came to Brussels, I think we're less than 100. So there is also a trend for perhaps to grow because the number of subjects have grown. The number of working party has grown as well. So as much as possible, member states have to take this into account and try to adjust the manpower accordingly and according to the number of subjects that the EU is actually covering now. As regards rotating presidencies, I'm a great fan of rotating presidencies. As Olivier was saying, because it changes perspective and new blood and new impetus. So that's one thing. The other element, which I think is important, is that you have national pride because you have the presidency and you're selling it at home. So in a sense, most of the time, I would say it's a way of increasing the level of knowledge about what Europe is about, what your country can do, and it involves administrations quite broadly into EU agenda. And even when you're out of the presidency, then you have these people that have worked for Europe directly as chairs or preparing instructions, and they bring to their job, their day-to-day national job, they bring this perspective. So it's a big training for national administrations in EU policies. And that certainly delivers lots of goodwill and results and commitment to European things. So that's also something which is very, very important. And, you know, Brussels, it's not Brussels, it's we chairing the meetings and participating in the discussions and defending what we have achieved together. So it gives a national dimension, which is, I think, very much welcome.
Thanks. I think it's something we can recognize to Macron, because Sarkozy or Hollande, when they were deciding something in Brussels with consensus, unanimity, you know, were deciding something in Brussels, and sometime back to Paris, it was like, oh, it's not us, it's because of the others, you know, like, okay, we were taking a coffee during that time, I don't know, but we were not there for the decision. So I think Macron is not like that. Just Ophélie, do you think the French presidency of the EU Council was sell in France? Do you heard a lot? Like, is your mom, I don't know, your family heard about that? Do you think, as a member of the Mouvement Européen France, do you think the French administration did enough to show to French people it was a French presidency?
I'm afraid I'm gonna have to be the one, like the annoying one in the room again, but I would say no. I mean, I was obviously aware and I was having a close look at what was happening and so on. I think that one thing that, President Macron and the current, former now government managed to do is to sell France in Europe. I think from France to the outside, I think that was done quite well into sometimes a bit aggressively as to imposing French as like the language, the main language, and as to selling the opportunities that France and the French companies had to offer, which was good in a sense, because it is also a time in which you're allowed to do that. Not that the French don't necessarily do it, but at least it's fair to do it, and I think one should absolutely do it when it's fair to do it. On the other hand, from Europe to France, again, as I said, I don't think that we heard more about Europe in France because we had the presidency. There was no specific activities or plan implemented in France to have an increase of pedagogy when it comes to Europe, and whatever you could see was an initiative from, I would say, private, whether that's companies or I don't know, think tanks or civil society organizations, just like the European movement, for instance, or the European of the European Federalists or others, but also from, for instance, I'm a lawyer, and like the Bar Association here in Paris has had a few events on, you know, we have the presidency. What does it mean, and what does it mean for justice, for instance? And I think that's actually also a sad thing when it comes to having taking a look at what was done during this presidency. You had this three aspects: so relance, puissance, appartenance. So like this belonging aspect that was supposed to be emphasized very much during the presidency, and that's actually the one that's from civil society organization we were hoping the most to be developed, because of course our everyday life since 70 years ago is to and has been to try to explain European matters to citizens. And I think that this is really the point that was lacking. And if one wants to be very fair to the entire situation, we have to acknowledge that having this war in Ukraine happening on the second month of the presidency, and having to deal with it, and having this traumatizing impact on the European continent, whether in France or not, actually, has impacted a lot the mentalities of the citizens and the way of working of the institutions. Having institutions, and I think that Mrs. Roger was discussing that when it comes to the budget, that you had so many items that were not planned and that occurred in the agenda that maybe have phased away some of the original planned or some of the items that were originally planned, and that is no one's fault. And if one wants to be really fair to the French president and its government at the time, I think that Emmanuel Macron's position and positioning on the international scene at the time of the war in Ukraine was absolutely the correct one. And as you were mentioning it, Camille, the idea of we will try to discuss with our European partners and then adopt a solution, or all this kind of, we could still try to do something together and be efficient together, and even like the rhetoric of the government at the time. I remember hearing Clément Beaune on the radio at the beginning of the war saying, well, there is what we would like to do, and there is what other of our partners still have problem with, and then we have to solve it before reaching a common position. So I think that that was done, but unfortunately the idea and this tendency of not really explaining things that are happening at the European level as if they were part of our national interest, as it was said before, has been a trend that we've had in France for a very long time. And I was seeing the comments saying that, yes, all member states try to defend their national interest. Luxembourg does it too. I've lived in Luxembourg for 6 years, so I know they do it too. But the feeling you have at home in Luxembourg of what Europe is and what we should try to build together, precisely because Luxembourg is a small country and they know what they've gained out of Europe. I think this is something that the big countries, and not only France, it's not only French bashing, like there are some very engaged people in Germany having the same criticism toward the German institutions, or same thing in Italy or in Spain, for instance. But I think it's a lesson that should be learned from the big countries, from the small countries to the big countries, to sort of water down your national interest a little bit. Yes, you're a big country. Yes, you have a lot, like you represent a lot of people and you really big economic centers, but we need everyone to like try to like build all of this together. And sometimes I think that we need at home to sort of keep on building this European feeling and precisely not thinking that Brussels is them and we are us, but just seeing it as, you know, we're all working towards the same cause. And that's also like, and I'll end up with that, why I think that the federalization of the union is something that we should achieve and rather sooner than later, precisely because when you have a structure that makes you understand that there are different levels and you don't lose powers to the next level, but you just exercise it in a different way. I think this is when we sort of become a structure that is not opposing levels, but as is trying to integrate them and make them work in a more efficient and logical way, and something that the citizens themselves feel like they have a say about, and not like it's being imposed on them.
Thank you very much. We have two questions in the chat, but it's 7, so I will answer to the first one because it's easy. The first one is, was there any debate on the substance of fiscal policy reform during the campaign? The answer is no, clearly. Even during the debate between Macron and Le Pen, I think it's too technical for people and they didn't try to work on that. And the other one, it's on, it's a long one. So it will be the last question for all of you. And if you want to have some conclusive remarks at the same time, please feel free to do it. So is Ukraine membership application viewed as an opportunity to strengthen and renew the EU itself, or it is rather waiting to the EU as an obligation that potentially threatens its own integration? Where do French find themselves between concerns over expanding voting rights to new members in the Council and the ambition to be a geopolitical player and promoter of freedom and democracy? So maybe first, I will do it the other way than at the beginning. So maybe Olivier, if you want to say something.
Well, I think it's rather the second option, and that there is traditionally reluctancy from French authorities and the fear that the integrity of the union could be lost in a too large and too quick expansion. And as I said, I think that it will feed a future debate to come on the institutional architecture of Europe. And in a way, be it Macron who win the parliamentary election or the left, it will not change much on that ground. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So Ophélie, if you want to comment on that.
I agree with what Olivier just said on the tendency of the French governments, one after the other, when it comes to adding people to the table. On the other hand, I think that regarding what's happening in Ukraine, it would be an historical mistake from like the European Union perspective not to open some perspective precisely to this country. And as you mentioned it quite fairly, Camille, we're not saying that Ukraine is going to be sitting at the table next year. We are saying that we are offering a country that might have in the long run the qualification and might respect the criteria that we've set for ourselves, the possibility to have something to look up to in a time in which they don't have much to look up to. And the strength of the answer that was made from Europe, but also around the world, but specifically in Europe, says a lot about our European leaders understanding what is at stake in Ukraine. And I think that not taking that into account and translating that into facts, and if we want to translate that into facts, opening the possibility to welcome a candidacy from Ukraine, with all of us knowing very well that it could even take 20 years before they can actually join, is for me the minimum that EU leaders and national leaders in the EU can grant to Ukraine.
Thank you. Gwendoline Delbos-Corfield, you have the floor.
Yeah, I think that we all have the question of the balance between this openness we need to have, and indeed knowing that it won't be easy and quick, and also not giving the impression to those that we were already in discussions with, that Ukraine is sort of stepping in front of all of them. I think that indeed France as an institutional difficulty to see integration on this side of the continent, and that yes, there's work to be done. And I think that one of the interesting steps that has to be made with the people in Ukraine, but also once again with those already in discussion in Serbia, in Macedonia, in Bosnia, in Montenegro, is to create links between the civils and organizations and populations and societies. And this is something where France is very weak, of course, because we have a lot of links with our ex-colonies and all of this in Africa and all this, but we have very little link with these countries, and this is something that will happen in the next years, and that we don't need to wait 15 years and 20 years. We need to open up in this dialogue, in this discussion, working with the civil organizations, with the populations of these countries, going there, meeting them, and that's where we have a weakness of French members of parliament, French society, also French organization, because we're not very open to this side of Europe. So I think that there we can make some steps already, and if the government was to give an impulse to this would be very good, and it would mean that they act and they don't only speak, while at the same time, of course, on the institutional track, being in a very logical system where we open the doors, say that we think that they belong to Europe, but we know that it's then you have the chapter thing and all of this. And for Ukraine, we're not even in the stage where they have asked, where we have acknowledged their request and did the accession first steps. So all of this takes time. But during that time, there's a lot that can be done, and that's where we are not as good. Also, because a country like Germany, we don't have these big foundations, with these big organizations that really does this work. We based a lot of what we do on francophonie in France, so that closes a bit our space. So I think that there are impulses that could be done, that could be very good coming from the government, and doesn't mean to wait for all the institutional steps.
Thank you. And Christine Roger, you have the last words.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm reading the question, which is very well formulated. I think it deserves a thesis, so I'm not exactly going to find the answer to that very elaborate question, which deserves serious consideration, obviously. The one thing I could say, though, is that, as was mentioned by Gwendolyn Delbos-Caulfield, it's a long process, normally, enlargement, and I'm a bit worried about precisely that. Raising hopes and not delivering. We've done that with some countries, and did this help the cause of Europe, or did it make Europe, more popular, and did it actually increase our influence over these countries? If we're sure we're going to deliver, that's just fine. But otherwise, that's a question. I mean, we have to ask ourselves. So if we go for it, maybe it's something that deserves some consideration as to what exactly it means. And maybe we should be a bit more creative. I think one of the panelists spoke about rethinking the architecture in general. And I think this is probably something we should be doing. I'm not ruling out enlargement. I'm just saying this is part of a bigger question. which is also linked to European security architecture. And if you look at what happened in the past, there's no former member of the Warsaw Pact which has joined the EU without being first a member of NATO. So what are we looking at here? Are we certain that we can give security guarantee on the basis of the treaty itself? Which guarantee de sécurité? Who is going to? Which organization is going to provide it? Really, us? Fine, but that would be a première, and also towards a country which, for some time, and that's a real shame, but is partially occupied. So all this, I think, deserves consideration, and enlargement might be an option. I'm not ruling this out. I'm just saying that, again, emotion may turn back on us, because emotions in Western societies, they go very high and they go down as well, very quickly. And when emotion has died, and those countries turned to us and said, look, you said we would join. We said, oh, come on, you didn't really believe us. You know, I mean, that kind of thing that we're experiencing currently. So let's do our best. Let's take this seriously, because this is a serious aspiration, and see what kind of answer we give. Maybe enlargement, maybe something different. But we need brains out there to just not, you know, the sort of knee-jerk reaction, oh, they're European, we're going to open the door. Let's think a bit. And if that's the right answer, then let's give it in a way which then is sure to end somewhere positive, and give hopes that we can actually answer and nurture in a way which is good for all, for them and for us as well.
Thank you very much. I agree so much with you. Just a last word from my side, just to say we have to be careful, because we can see, for example, in the Balkans, there is a EU fatigue. We are always talking about the EU fatigue from the EU side, but and then enlargement fatigue, sorry, from the EU side, but we have an EU fatigue from the Balkans, because they're waiting for years. And now people are losing hope in the EU and in the fact they will be member one day of the EU. So we will have to be careful with that. Thank you to all of you to join us today. It was really, really interesting. I received texts from people saying that it was really interesting. So thank you very much to all of you. And I hope to be able to see you soon and to discuss again about the European subject with all of you.